all I thought about was don't mess up. Don't mess up. So I was just, oh my God.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Musician's Mentor Podcast. As per usual, I am your host, Travis Mark, and I am beyond excited to say that my guest today is none other than former Smashing Pumpkins guitarist and band member, Jeff Schroeder. During his time with the Smashing Pumpkins, Jeff appeared on 5 studio albums, as well as toured with the band from 2007 to 2023 before his departure. Jeff was also involved with acts like the Violet Burning and the Lassie Foundation. We talk about that and so much more. And we also talk about his amazing first solo record, Metanoia. Before we jump into today's interview, please let me remind you that if you're getting anything from these interviews, please leave us a rating or review across your favorite streaming platforms. Additionally, don't forget to check out our affiliation with the lovely folks over at Soundbreeder. There's a link in the show notes. There's also all of Jeff's information linked in our show notes. Make sure you check that out. For now, let's jump straight into this interview. Ladies and gentlemen, the one and only Jeff Schroeder. Alrighty. Jeff, former Smashing Pumpkins guitarist, the Lassie Foundation, the Violet Burning, just all-round talented dude. I've been following you for years. I know a lot about you, and obviously I do a bit of research for these things, but I don't want to just talk about you. I've got the opportunity to talk to you, so I will record an introduction post this interview. Something I get all my guests to do, Jeff, is give us a brief introduction as to who Jeff Schroeder is. Tell us what you've done, how you got into music, etc., etc. But obviously that's a long-winded question. So as short or as long as you'd like, please, sir.
Sure, I guess we'll start from the top. I think it's easiest to start with. I think most people out in the world would know me that I played guitar in the Smashing Pumpkins for 16, 17 years. And I would say that, most people know me as a musician, although in more recent months, actually, I thought I actually did have a previous life. But to stay on the musician side of things for a second, so before I joined the Smashing Pumpkins and did that, I had a kind of a shoegaze indie rock band that played for a long time called the Lassie Foundation. And, and that was like kind of mid 90s to early 2000s. And we were I would call it second wave shoegaze band, which it's so interesting to talk about because now there's been like this massive shoegaze revival. But in 96, 97, we were like, wow, we were really influenced by this stuff that came out in the late 80s, early 90s out of mostly the UK, although there were American bands that were part of that first wave, like the band Medicine, which was massive influence on me and us. And Brad, the kind of leader of Mesa, would probably hate to be lumped in with the shoegaze thing, which is actually a good it's fair for him to say that. But anyways, we were kind of in that genre, and then as time kind of progressed, we got just maybe more straight up indie, because we were influenced by American stuff like Yola Tango, and still very guitar centric and guitar noisy. So that was like actually, but the last of it was like a big part of my musical heritage, before joining the Pumpkins. And we released 4 or 5 records on various indie labels, and mostly played in LA and California, but did a few small tours here and there. Before that, I was in the band called the Violet Burning, which was a band actually I joined right after I graduated high school. I think kind of around the summer of 92, I joined that band. And for me, it was great because I was able to get out of high school and leave my high school basically garage band and then go straight into a band that was playing clubs. And it was cool because, at the time the guys seemed so much older to me because they were maybe like 26, 27 years old and I was 18, but it seemed like wow, these are men and I'm just a kid.
Yeah, of course.
But it was great. And so by, by the end of the first year that I had graduated high school, I was playing every club in LA and getting that experience. And so it was great. Um, yeah, so that's kind of like my short musical history. But kind of intermixed in that, I had a long history where I actually kind of left music from 2001, say, to 2007, where I really wasn't too active because I started pursuing getting my doctorate in comparative literature at UCLA. And I was really planning on having an academic career as a professor. I was, you know, really wasn't doing much music. Somewhere in the middle of that, while I was at grad school, it was like, hey, because all the Lassie Foundation guys were around, we're like, let's get together and play once a week, rehearse once a week. And I think we did a record somewhere in there and played a few shows, but it was not, we didn't have any professional aspirations at that point. It was just more, let's just do it for fun. And we like each other. And then, so I had, goals and pursuits and desires within academia that I wanted to pursue and was very focused on and working very hard to do. And so I think, many people wouldn't know that part of my life. Like I said, they know me just as the musician. And I think that's actually been a split and a dichotomy that's been difficult for me because I don't see the division as much because I am actually, to me, they come from the same passion for art, whether it's musical art, literary art, visual art. I'm inspired by it all and have interest in it all. But professional occupations go, well, you're a musician or you're a professor or you study literature, or you study film or you study music or whatever it is. So trying to find a life and a job where you can actually do all those things is something that I think that I'm still searching for. And and when you look out in the world and you go, well, okay, who kind of does what I would like to do? You see someone, I really start thinking like, well, who is kind of does these different things like this? And there's very few people that I could think of, and not to highlight myself like, oh my gosh, I'm so special, because, I've come across, people that are professors, that are musicians and whatnot. But one of the few people that really does it well and is very well known is someone like Brian Eno.
Yeah.
Who writes books, obviously makes music, is experimental musician on top of that and works in all types of various art forms. And, has been, unlike most people, extremely successful at being that guy. So when you look at something like that, you go, that's where it can be difficult because, on the one hand, you're like, wow, I'm so inspired by someone like him. Like how great that there it is. There's, I can kind of, what did he do? What, how does he do it? But then also it can be very difficult because you start going, well, I can't be Brian Eno. That's like, he's like up here on this shelf and I'm like way down here. Like, how could I even begin to think, like, how dare you even think or be inspired by something like that? You're just, you just play some rock guitar. You're not him. So, but yeah, so that's kind of more, if you ask me, I think that's a kind of a clearer indication of who I am from an artistic standpoint. Of course, there's other aspects of our life, our spiritual life, our personal life, or all these kind of things. But I think from an artistic standpoint, I think that's a pretty good encapsulation of how I would describe myself. Yeah.
Well, it's quite interesting because when I was listening to your record this week, I was like, man, this has such a soundscapey kind of vibe, like early Brian Eno records. And I was thinking, most people most people. Yes, there's this school of musicians that are obsessed with Brian Eno, of course. But like the average person on the street doesn't know who Brian Eno is. So like to put out a record like that, especially the length of your songs is, I mean, we'll talk about all of this during the course of the interview.
Mm-hmm.
But I was like, man, this is quite something. Like I was trying to think about what you might have been thinking when you were doing some of that stuff. But the length of your songs, I was like, wow, this is a brave move. I mean, to be in the band you were in, to then go into doing this and keeping your songs at this kind of length, it's almost very film score kind of based, you know? It's funny because I was thinking Brian Eno when I was listening to that record, but I was thinking, well, what are the chances, you know? So that's amazing. And also just to caveat your answer there, I think humans do, especially when they're fans of somebody's art or music, I think it's very easy to think they only do this. And it's hard to think that there's a human there with a personal life and dogs and a partner and education and other interests. So I think that's a great answer. All right. I've only got a certain amount of time to talk to you, so I'm going to try and like condense as much here as possible. The Violet Burning was an interesting band to read about because there's actually quite a few musicians who have gone through that revolving door as members that have had success. So that was a thing that I was going to bring up. And then obviously you mentioned the Lassie Foundation. All worthy topics. Obviously, the biggest one would be to talk about the Smashing Pumpkins because of how household name they became in the 90s onwards, right? So I want to ask you this. You mentioned that you'd kind of taken, let's call it a break, but not so much of a hiatus from music. And then you land up kind of finding yourself as a touring member in the Smashing Pumpkins, I think around 2007. Talk to me, if you wouldn't mind, about how that opportunity came about.
Sure. Like I said, I was not really thinking about pursuing a musical career, which many people do out here in Los Angeles. I was getting my doctorate at UCLA. I was, I was taking, my exams and thinking about my dissertation and whatnot. And one day, a friend of mine, who actually Jason, who was the bass player in Lassie Foundation and the Violet Burning for a while, just texted me and said, "Hey, I know someone who's works at this management company, and they said the Smashing Pumpkins are reforming, and they're James and Darcy aren't coming back, so they're going to be looking for a guitar player and bass player." And just to clarify, because you had mentioned in your description that it was a touring member, but that actually was not how it was presented. It was presented as they want people to join the band. They very specifically said, "We are not looking for hire musicians."
Oh, cool.
I mean, that's what they said. You know what I mean? I'm not saying that's not what it was, but that's how it was presented as. We don't want basically session players.
Yeah.
Which is, I think, why they were interested in someone like me, who was not someone who's like, "Hey, I'm trying out for Smashing Pumpkins on Tuesday, Hole on Wednesday, Semisonic on Thursday." You know what I mean? You name it. Like, I'm just trying to get a gig in 90s alternative rock band or something like that. They were looking for someone who had, obviously the right musical background and then also a personal background and kind of had their own life. So I think that now that looking back at it, those types of things really played in my favor. So when Jason messaged me, he said, "Here's, the management info." And so I think I must have written an email, and they said, "Yeah, can you send us a bio and stuff?" And I'm like, "I don't have a bio because I'm doing audition for bands. I've only been in my own, I've kind of had my own bands or joined bands like in a more organic way, And so I just sat there one day and I'm like, okay, let me put together a bio. And, I was a fan of the Smashing Pumpkins, so I knew, like, when I wrote, like, well, what am I into from a guitar perspective? I knew that I probably is not going to get me the gig if I put like my guitar influences, Jerry Cantrell, you know what I mean? Like these kind of obvious 90, Kim Thayil, like nothing, no offense to those, but I knew that if I was just like, "Hey, I'm just a big 90s fan," I probably wouldn't get the gig because I, knew Billy's mindset enough to, and And to be honest, those weren't really my influences. So when I put together, hey, this is what I'm into from a guitarist perspective, it was like Richie Blackmore and and Kevin Shields and Brad Lehner from Medicine, which toured with the Pumpkins very early on, and Billy and Brad were friends, and Brad is an obscure guitarist, and I wasn't trying to be obscure for I was just trying to be honest, and this is really what I was into. So and then 80s things like Will Sargent from Echo and the Bunnymen, which was a huge influence. And so I think that once Billy, I can only assume, what I mean, that once he's like, okay, like this is someone who understands very intimately where the guitar language comes from. That is kind of the basis of this band, because so I sent it in. I got literally like a call the next day. And like a few days after that, I was having lunch, I think, with Billy and Jimmy at some restaurant in the Valley, because they were out here in LA working on finishing Zeitgeist, which was to be the Zeitgeist record. And it wasn't an audition where it was like, hey, come down learn these 3 songs, come down on Tuesday, and then we'll let you know if you got the gig. It was like, here, learn these 3 songs, let's get together. And I would just jam with Jimmy, and then some random bass player, a whole slew, and because I was one of the first people they tried out and on guitar, maybe the first actually, that they actually tried out on guitar. I think there was a bass player maybe before, and so I did, and they were like, "Oh, that's pretty good," and they were so gracious and so cool. They were like, "Hey, we jammed for like an hour or something," and then Jimmy would be like, "Hey, you want to come and hang out with us at the studio? Just watch what we do. Just get." And so I would go and get to hang out with them, watch them record. Hang out with Billy and get. And I think it was like, let's get to know each other.
Yeah.
And they tried out other guitar players as well during that time. So it was over months of let's get together, let's play, and then make a long story short, I ended up getting the gig along with Ginger, at the time Ginger Reyes, now Ginger Pooley, but at the end, and we actually were kind of friends too, so it was great. So because I knew her from the LA music scene as well. So and like I said, they were, they told us like, we're not like, we want you guys to be in the band. It didn't really work out that way, what I mean, because I think that they were, I don't want to get into the politics of that, what I mean, because I think it's a difficult situation, but I wouldn't have joined a band to be like, hey, because I wasn't looking to be a gigging musician. Was I interested in joining a great band with a high artistic pedigree and go on that journey? Absolutely, because that was something that I was always into as a kid. I didn't, but I was very also, strangely, for being in the music industry as a, indie musician, I was very naive about the real business. Because I'd only kind of inched around like that level of success, of working with the band and management companies and booking agents and lawyers. When you're an indie musician, you're kind of just on the margins of that, and you don't, you do a lot of handshake agreements or no agreement, or what I mean, like what I mean, record deals with I mean, companies putting out records for you with no paperwork, this kind of stuff. So once I was very naive about all that stuff, and I just went along for the ride.
Yeah.
Because what it did satisfy for me, it was all new. And it was just such a great learning experience. And I went from, no offense to my previous bandmates, they're so cool, but I'm like, wow, like all of a sudden I'm on stage with, Billy and Jimmy and Ginger and playing like at this level. And it was really difficult. I mean, I really had to get my act together. It was that first couple of years was really hard. I was not, I didn't know really what it meant to be a professional on that level.
Yeah, high pressure situation, and as someone who followed that band or follows that band, it's never easy coming in as the new guy. And what I love about your journey, and again, I don't know all the ins and outs of that, but you actually end up being one of the longest standing members of that band before you eventually decide to leave. So I've got a bit of a strange question to ask here, and it's possibly a little bit loaded, but what can you talk to my listeners about in regards to being a team player when it comes to being in a band? So, I mean, yeah, we could obviously talk all day about, okay, so you had to learn how to travel, or you had to learn how to operate on a headline level or whatever. And if we have time, we will. But I've always found it really interesting, especially when you're at that peak of success on a musical level, how you sometimes watch bands implode. I've spoken about this numerous times on the podcast. It's so interesting to me because when you look at the grassroots of a band, 9 times out of 10, it's strangers that came together to form friendships. And I put that in inverted commas because sometimes you're actually not friends. You're just all fighting for the greater cause. And there seems to be this very much like gang mentality kind of effort in regards to, hey man, we're going to be the biggest band on the planet kind of thing. And sometimes they achieve it. And then when they achieve it, you start to see things fall apart. And suddenly they realize, actually, I don't have anything in common with this person, or I don't like hanging out with that person. So I find it fascinating that you can be in a band for that long. I think people don't realize the relationship dynamic. So what wisdom or tips or advice, if any, do you think you could offer on just being a team player?
Yeah, that's a great question. So thank you so much for asking. And I think I'm going to, instead of directly answering at first, which I will, I'll go in a roundabout way.
Sure.
Because I think that a band is, I think it's, and I'll start with the abstract and then kind of move more into like kind of my more concrete experience is I think that as a music listener, right, when we look from the outside in at a band, there's, maybe from our generation and maybe younger, I think these things are kind of shifting because the idea of a band is, but let's talk about kind of the high point of rock and roll, which was say from the Beatles, through, the 90s or something like that,
Yeah.
And maybe things have kind of shifted since then, there's something very alluring about a band, especially looking from the outside, whether it's like I said, the Beatles, Zeppelin, U2, right? Where it's like, oh my gosh, it's this brotherhood, or let's, talk about, L7 or something like Women, or, our band like Bikini Kill, where they're coming together and having this, different genders coming together and kind of creating this bond that's, if you're not in the band, it's a bit impenetrable, and so much rock criticism has been like trying to understand, like, what is it that makes these people come together? And and like I think your question, you put it out so well, is because they come from different backgrounds, and when you read all the bios, you're like, yeah, Robert Plant came from here, and Jimmy Page from this and this background, and they shouldn't have met, but they did, or whatever. I think that as listeners and as fans of music, we are attracted to that because I think, at least from the outside in, on a very naive level, and this is just my own personal theory about it, is it's bands can be like small, like social, like a small vision of utopia, where you're like, wow, like we live in this harsh world where there's a hierarchy and all these things, and then, like I said, from the naive point of view, you're like, wow, look at these 4 people on stage. Like they, and when it's a band like that where everybody is important, it's like a special thing that you don't get to see very often in life. And so that we're like, what actually the collective is more powerful than any individual. Right. And then as we go and we become mature and we learn about music history, you go like, wow, it was really John and Paul, and George was a little bit like on the and then Ringo even more, or you know what I mean? You know what I mean? You start learning like and it kind of, if it can be fascinating as a musical historian, but it also it can be kind of deflating
Oh yeah,
too,
totally.
as a fan, you know what I mean? When you go like, what do you mean? Like, 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 U2's not like this cohesive thing like they present themselves to be,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? So there's that, right? So there's that. And then, there's the business side of things, and some bands, especially when they're young, you know, like let's take U2. I think that they, and who knows what their business arrangement is now, but at that time they would have said, okay, everybody's going to make the same. We're going to split all the songwriting, the publishing, everything, and Paul McGuinness, the manager, is actually going to get a cut of all this too. So it's like a 5-member band, and everybody's going to make the same amount, and because the argument would be from Paul, like, look at over the long run, this is going to be better because it's going to create divisions in the future if one person is driving a Rolls Royce and one person's driving a Honda.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Or
completely.
you're living in a 50, you know what I mean? But 10 years down the road, maybe that creates resentment because someone in the band's going like, well, I'm writing all the songs. This person's going out on Riviera vacation and getting messed up, and I'm sitting here with the pressure of having to come up with new material, right? So we've heard this narrative so many times from, I mean, this is like a common thing. So, so I think when you think about those situations, it's how do you be a good band member in that? What is it? Because these are difficult, really almost impossible. Everything in society is against keeping it together, because, and I'll shift to the business side of things is once you have someone that's like, say, a manager that say isn't someone like a Paul McGuinness that really wants, let's say that wants to really, hey, keeping these 3, 4, 5 people intact is key, manager, they're going like, oh, I can't fucking deal with 4 people and be on the, who's the most important person in this band? Okay, you. And so these, and they create, the business comes in and creates a division out of, say, practicality.
Yeah.
And again, over and over, you've seen these things time and time again. So again, how do you be a good band member? I think it's hard. Because as musicians and artists, we're sensitive people. And when you're a kid in the garage playing with your friends and just having the time of your life, oh my gosh, we just played Smells Like Teen Spirit. And it's just like the most euphoric experience. And let's start a band. Like, I want more of this. This experience is so great to me. I want more of this. And you start playing, you don't know about the business. You don't know about these things. You just want, it doesn't actually get better than that.
Yeah.
It doesn't get better. So I would say that it's actually, you have to keep on looking for that. The musical experience has to be the most important thing because all of the other stuff is disappointing. And so how that figures into being a good bandmate is really trying to improve yourself as a musician and really taking your role as what you do on an artistic musical level seriously. I think many bands disintegrate because it becomes about so many other things than the music, than the art itself. It becomes about, egos and like putting the least amount of time so I can spend more time on vacation or pursuing these other things that I want to do. And so for me, like I said, I speak from my own experience. Like, it was always difficult navigating all those waters, and I joined a band that was already super established. So you're walking into a dynamic and a structure that already has its own energy, and you have to kind of learn and figure it out as you go along. You're not part of it from day one. I think what I did and and I can tell you why I stayed in the band. I think why, Billy and, really him, because, other people kind of came and went, no one else was consistent, and it's really his band. Um, kept me, because it wasn't like we were always the best of friends, and not in a bad way. I think because he's already a grown adult with this huge, I'm already an adult. Like it's not like we grew up in the same neighborhood. He's from Chicago, I'm from LA. Like I think that and I think this is what's really great about music is we got along when we got along because we agreed on like our work ethic as it came to being musicians. You know what I mean? Because you can't you can't mess with that. You can't go like, wow, he's playing great, he's singing great, he's writing great songs. You know what I mean? Like we're working hard, like that stuff that is hard to mess with.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so I think like if your job in the band is to be a guitar player, then you should work really hard at being a guitar player, both in and outside the band.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's everything from maintaining your technique and chops and learning new things, and so you can bring new perspectives to the table let's say, I'll speak as a guitar from a guitar standpoint. Your sound is improving. Everything about it is. I think you have to be rooted in the musical.
Yeah.
I mean, some bands, though, you know what I mean? Like I said, the other stuff is important too, like being, supportive, not trying to derail your bandmates, and that's the harder job because, like I said, we tend to be sensitive people and we get our feelings hurt. And like I said, managers come in and why is the photographer only taking pictures of that person? Hey, I'm over here. I mean, this kind of stuff really gets it and hits your ego.
Yeah.
And that's tough. You know what I mean? So yeah, that's the tough stuff. So
totally. And the sensitivity thing with musicians is definitely, it's there for a breed of people that seem so I don't care when they're on stage and you see videos and pictures and stuff. When you start peeling away that onion layer, some of the most sensitive people I've ever met, I mean, people are sensitive as is, and it seems to be getting worse through social media. But, no one wants to think that their part's not important, right? So,
yeah.
Let's shift gears just for a couple minutes, Jeff. I mentioned earlier traveling. You are absolutely no stranger to touring and traveling in a band sort of environment. So could you maybe shed any light on any must-haves or quirks that you have while being on the road to sort of stay sane and mentally healthy from a kind of life point of view?
Sure. I mean, there's lots of things. I was very lucky, being in the Smashing Pumpkins that we traveled nice, stayed in nice hotels, and had roadies to take care of the gear. So I really, when I wasn't on stage or at sound check or at the venue, it really was kind of my time, which is a luxury and a privilege, and I really value that. And I mean, the great thing that was really wonderful about my time with the Pumpkins is no one in the band was like a crazy partier or anything like that. We took playing from day one. It was understood that playing a great show is the most important thing, and I would not to say that we didn't have fun, but it was fairly serious in that way. There were not a lot of shenanigans going on. I think it's kind of disappointing because people always want to go, I want to go backstage and see what it's like. And there's nothing. It's really actually really boring. You know what I mean? It's just, but for me, when I first joined the band, and this is like, it sounds like really dumb, but I was like, oh, wow. Like, how many suitcases? I can have 2 suitcases, 2 carry-on. I had all this stuff.
Yeah.
And I realized, like, okay, I don't want to be lugging this around. So my first bit of advice would be travel light. have what you need and what you and to keep you, but you know, try to carry it as least amount on it because it actually makes the traveling experience easier. It's less to keep track of, you know. And even though I'm a very physical media person, I have thousands of books, thousands of records. I love when I'm at home, but on the road, it's obviously I'm listening to music off my phone and, e-reader and this kind of stuff. So I can travel light. I think that's big. And then another thing for me is I always like to have some kind of project that I can kind of work on the road, whether it's that, I studied jazz guitar for a long time and, so I would take like a jazz guitar with me or, just so I could have something to work on, in addition to just going back to the room and turning on the TV and doing that. So that is something that I really like. And then the third thing is something that is, and I know it just seems so obvious, but maybe not a lot of people really think about. But I learned this actually, from years of therapy, is that, yeah, I remember, my last therapist, I worked with her for 4 years, which is, to me, I don't know if that's a long, but then I talked to my other friend who actually is a therapist. She's like, that's like an incredibly long period of time to work with one therapist. She told me the first day, she said, we're going to sit here, we're going to talk, we're going to get into things, but I can tell you the most positive thing for your mental health is sleep. To actually get good, healthy sleep. So when you're on the road, that can be difficult because, so you finish a show, like say, and I'm talking from my experience, like, okay, finish at 11, get on the bus at, midnight and you're off to the next city. Luckily for, I said, we travel. We have nice buses. We've had 2 band buses, so they're not even, lots of room, lots of personal space, which is great. But oftentimes, especially when you're on the East Coast, you end up at your hotel because we had always, even though we have a bus, we'd always go to a hotel, which is great. So you get to wake up in the bed, have a shower and, all that kind of stuff. But you get maybe 3 or 4 hours of sleep. Then you got to get up, get out of the bus, go get your bags, check into the hotel. So you're awake again. So you have days and days of broken sleep.
Yeah.
And so when you have a day off, it's super important actually. Just sometimes I would be like, well, I want to go out and I want to go to this museum. I want to do this stuff. But if I'm feeling tired, I was like, you know what? I need to stay in bed, get a book, get a magazine, watch a movie, and just sleep as much as possible. So I would say, as simple as it sounds, sleep is key.
That's amazing. And a little side note, what sort of books do you like to read?
Oh my gosh, I like to punish myself. So I mean, I studied literature, so I do read fiction, but I also like a lot of in my field in kind of study like cultural studies, studying literature, art, film. It's something called critical theory, but which is kind of I wouldn't say it's really philosophy in the strict sense in that way, but it's theories for talking about and analyzing culture. And so it has a lot of overlay with, say, like kind of especially European styles of philosophy in discussing like aesthetics and aesthetics relation to the world, and that way. So I read a lot of stuff like that.
That's awesome, dude.
And I'm a huge music history person, so I'm always reading books about musicians and bands and styles and genres and movements. So that's really good reading for tour as well, because sometimes you don't have the mental capacity to deal with dense stuff.
Totally understandable. Yeah. Okay, so you get to 2023, you decide to leave the Pumpkins. I've read about this before, both recently doing research for the podcast and then in the past when it actually happened. I know that you cited that you wanted to explore some different paths. We'll get into that momentarily. I don't quite know how to phrase this. Talk to me about the mindset when making this type of decision? Because this is not an easy decision to make. You're essentially in one of the biggest rock bands on the planet, and you decide to leave. This is very brave, in my opinion. What was going on? What led you to make that decision? I mean, again, we're going to talk about your music relatively soon, but I'm imagining from a human level, that's a decision that you probably go back and forth, trying to weigh up pros and cons. How did it work for you?
Yeah, it's for sure. I mean, and it's funny now talking to you on, right now on March 7th, 2025. And I think my answer is different now than I would have given you, say, November 2023, right after it happened, even though I made the decision, right? Because it's taken me that much time to even sort through like kind of the feelings that you have and that are pointing you towards a decision to go like, well, what is motivating that? Really, what's it about? And so it's taken me honestly time to get clarity on my own decision-making process. And that may sound crazy to people, but I think it's the truth about our life is, you have intuitions about things. I think I did think about it for a while because I think what ultimately became clear to me and someone may go like, well, hello, that's so obvious, but as I told you, I was very personally naive, even though I was, like had been a musician and, I'm in graduate school. I didn't, like I said, I didn't know anything about how the music business really works. And I don't even know if I still do. It's such a complicated, it's such a complicated business. You know what I mean?
It's like the most loaded topic, right?
And so like I said, when I joined the band, I didn't know I had and I used to tell Billy this. I said, I had no idea what I was walking into. But and I say this in a way that, and I think this shows, kind of my deep love for those people and kind of what makes you stick together, even though you're so different, is I think there has to be some kind of bond. You know what I mean? There has to be some kind of bond. And I think the bond is you got to be a little bit off your rocker to be in that band, in a good way. You know what I mean? Like, and it means like you're passionate about things in a way that the normal person is just like, hey, I'm a hobbyist. And maybe the difference is like, I got to explore this space. But as you get older, you try to balance that stuff so it's not destructive behavior. So I think that, it was such a great band to be because everybody's very passionate about the music and the art. But like I said, I had no idea what I was getting into and I didn't understand the business of bands. And I think that's really the problem. I think, I don't think any of us have any issue if we're in a room and it's just about music. I mean, but that's not the music. That's not being in a band that's successful and on tour. And, I mean, there's a whole business, there's the industry, there's managers, there's booking agents, there's lawyers, there's this whole massive infrastructure that now you're inserting yourself with. And that's not just Smashing Pumpkins, that's any band. And so, like I said, I since I didn't know about this, I didn't realize like what my opportunities were going to be or not going to be. I just was, I was just like, hey, do you want to play guitar? Yes, I do. I think that sounds like really fun. I love this band. I love the music. And like I said, in especially those first 10 years, I just grew so much as a person, as a musician, as an artist. And to me, people pay to go to college, to learn to be a musician, and you don't learn to be a musician because you're in college. Yeah. You know what I mean? So not only did I get to learn how to be a musician in the real world, I got paid to do it, which is how cool is that?
Yeah.
Amazing. So, you know what I mean? So it was worth it to me because I was like, wow, like I'm just growing and these experiences are incredible. This music is great. Like these shows are awesome. But then after a while, you do it and you've done it, and you realize like, well, but wait a second, this isn't my band. And this is not a criticism of anybody in the band, because it would be the same if, I was in U2 or Led Zeppelin. I mean, any band you join, it's very rare that people go, hey, let's open the door for you.
Yeah.
And you're going to have all the same perks and you know what I mean, and benefits as someone else. It just, even if people present it that way, it's usually not the case. I mean, but yeah. But like I said, I didn't know any of this stuff. You know what I mean? I didn't know how it worked, and I wasn't smart enough to go, maybe I should hire a lawyer for just a couple hours, of my time and go, so when you join a band like this, what is really going to take place? You know what I mean? And they would go, well, you should, these are going to be probably your options. They're going to, cut you in as a full member from day one, which is, probably not going to happen. Or you're going to be on salary, as a paid employee. And, you work for this company. You're working for a company. It's a great job.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know what I mean? But we don't think of, because, going back to our earlier, we don't think of bands like that. No. We think of it like, oh my God, like I'm part of this thing. I'm part of this band, the mythology, the whole thing. Like I'm in the videos and like I'm part of this thing, and it's like, well, no, you're an employee of this company as you are. Yes, that is true. But you are also an employee of this company. Yeah. And you're not the president. You're not the CEO. You just work there, and it's maybe a great experience, and so I understand that now. And so once that became, like I said, it took me a long time to figure all this stuff out. And it seems so, it's not that I didn't. Of course I understood, because I got the paychecks. I knew what my relationship was, but I didn't understand what it kind of meant, because like I said, I was just more blind about like, wow, like I'm getting paid to play the guitar and I'm learning and I love this. This is great. So it was worth it to me, but then after a while, just on a very personal level, I just got to where like, wow, I'm going to be 50 pretty soon. What is it that I want to do with my life? And then kind of going back to the beginning of this conversation, I had my own dreams, goals, aspirations as a person. And at, when did I leave? 2006, 2007, when I left UCLA to do this. And so what are any of those dreams that I had back then still valid in 2023 and now 2024, 2025, what does it, because I don't want to it's not like I want to, because people are like, oh, are you going to return to academia as a literature professor? I'm like, no, but I just spent the last 16 years working really hard as a musician. and I loved it. And it means something to me. I think what's hard for people to grasp is they're like, well, what are you going to do? And I'm like, well, first of all, I'm just going to decompress from 17 years of being in this situation.
Get more than 4 hours sleep.
Well, but it just takes a while to get out of the bubble.
Yeah.
Because you're in that type of this bubble where the world treats you a certain way because you are a member of this band. That's, and doors open for you that, and so once you get out of there, you realize, okay, it's a different world and you got to recalibrate to, I wouldn't say that's not reality, because that is reality when you're doing it.
Yeah.
That is your reality. But then when you're not doing it, you're faced with another one. So it's just taken me a while to go, well, what is it that I'm interested in? And so a lot of those earlier interests are now starting to, how can they come back and be meaningful to me as someone who had this 17 years of experience being a musician? So that's what I said. So my life, like my life work, which is part of my artistic process, is working out this idea of like, what is it's no different than and going like, I want to write this song. I have this feeling here. I can't totally articulate it here, so I have to work on a piece of art or music that explains it. And this song structure that I normally use or chord sequence isn't the right one, so I have to kind of play around with things to kind of get there. I think that's kind of what I've been doing. So, but I still haven't answered your questions like what went through on my. So I just I just realized like, hey, I'm turning 50. I probably only have, let's say, 20 years of time to really be active in pursuing the things before like the physicality of existence becomes detrimental, more makes things more difficult, right? So I just said, this isn't my band. This isn't, this isn't my band. And as much as I love it here, as much as I like the people, as much as it's not my band. And I have to go and pursue my own dreams for better, for worse. And that's really was like just the feeling, it was nothing like overly negative or anything like that. It's just more of like, it's like, because it's hard because people look like, but why would you? Because I was still in the, when the Green Day tour, like playing stadiums, like I was still in the band when managers were like, oh, we got this, it's going to be great. And people were like, wouldn't you want to do that? And I'm like, yes, but also no, because it's not like I'm not growing as an artist, as a musician. I mean, I need to, that's a nice experience, but um, like I said, for my own happiness, I just have to make like the artistic decisions and put myself in a place where I feel totally uncomfortable and like I was when I first joined the band. It wasn't like when I got to 2018 and we're back in arenas and playing Madison Square Garden, you're like okay, like wow, like I realized like wow, it was like from 2007 to then where that was the journey of getting to be that person who felt confident on those stages and felt like wow, like this is awesome. And I could enjoy those experiences because what was interesting was when I first joined the band in 2007, we were playing some massive festivals in Europe. I remember we played Rock am Ring in Germany, and it's like 70,000 people. It's like my third show. I hardly remember it. I can barely remember being on stage because I was so nervous and so scared that all I thought about was don't mess up. Don't mess up. So I was just like the world out there kind of almost I was just, oh my God. So
Understandable.
yeah. And so then when you think about like by the time like 2018 rolls around, you're like, wow, like I love being up here. This is so, wow, look at all these people. Like, and, let me play the solo and have fun and enjoy the energy of the moment. Like, and that's a great place to be, and I loved it. But then part of me started feeling like, okay, what's next?
Yeah.
And yeah, that's really what it came down to, and going like, okay, how are you picking up that dream that you had when you were at UCLA? How are you going to incorporate being a musician, being an intellectual, scholar, and again, and so that's the work day in and day out.
I got to give you credit. I love how you almost have single-handedly showcased throughout this interview so far how multifaceted people can be. I mean, I do a lot of these things. I do several a week, and I'm super grateful to talk to people like yourself. But, it's so music driven that like often we don't talk about just the fact that you might have different aspirations. You might have different hopes and goals. And I love how transparent that's been. So thank you. Now I am going to bring up a couple more music questions before I let you go.
Sure.
But I wanted to just applaud you on that. Thanks, man. Okay. So now I really hope I pronounced this correctly. Let's discuss exploring some of those different parts in the form of your first solo album,
That's
Metanoia.
correct. Yeah,
Phew, I practiced that one.
Metanoia.
I practiced that one. I thought it was great. Like I mentioned earlier, I listened to it a couple times this week. I'm totally into that soundscapey, Brian
Yeah.
Eno-y kind of vibe. So I thought it was wonderful. What was your creative process behind the album or making the album?
Well, there is a logic to it, and I'm sorry for all the long-winded answer.
Not at all. Not at all.
But I, after leaving the band, I think kind of the obvious thing that people would expect, like, hey, why don't you start like a '90s inspired alternative rock band? Because that's what people would want to people who maybe like the Smashing Pumpkins would want to hear something like that. And and I felt, and that was totally the thing that I didn't want to do. Yeah, I'm like, well, because what I've been very conscious of is that, because people ask, what are you going to do? Right? The day I quit, the manager's like, well, what are you going to do? And I just said, I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I was on it. I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm not going to stay here. I mean? Because it's a very kind of rude question. You know what I mean? When you think about it, like, what are you going to do? It's like, well, do I need to have that decided today? Is that really what it's about? Like, what's going to be my next business move? No, it's about, life and being happy and believing in what you're doing. And so I'm going to just sit and decompress from this conversation is what I'm going to do first. That, may take years. I mean, so, I knew I didn't want to do that. And what it came to be is I had actually Metanoia, was something that came about by actually talking to, now I would consider him first and foremost a friend, but he was also someone that I worked with business wise through Yamaha and Line 6, Matt Ferguson, who's a great human being and been supportive of me for so long. You know what I mean? And we had shot like an artist profile video at one point, and at a studio in LA. And during that shooting, he was like, hey, can you make so we have some kind of background music. Can you sit here while we have some time in this beautiful studio and just create some soundscapes and stuff with using the Line 6, the Helix and the looper and stuff. And so I did. And I forgot about it completely. And somewhere, years later, he goes, hey, we're actually doing this video for something else, but can I use some of those soundscapes you made for that, for this video? I'm like, yeah, of course. That'd be great. I mean, Yamaha's great. They always compensate you. I mean, like, yeah, even if not, regardless of the money, I would have been happy. And I said, hey, but can you do me a favor? Can you send me those things? And he sent them to me, and I was like, well, maybe I can use this and put out an EP or something. I listened to it and I'm like, oh, they're not that great. You know what I mean? They're good, but it was like, I didn't, it was a little, disappointing at first. You're like, oh, I thought I'm going to get this little gold mine of stuff and like, oh, how great. But it made me think, I'm like, oh, but you know what? I got to go back and listen to, because what Metanoia emerged from is in 2021 is I actually performed at an outdoor art installation in Toronto. And that was over 3 days, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and did 7 performances that were, 7 45-minute performances, and then 1 15-minute performance that was for the city, because they only want to come and see. They're like, oh, what did we pay for? Okay, great, now we're going to go. And so, and so it was all improvised music like that, which is why the tracks are so long. Because it was improvised over these kind of visuals that this artist had created. And so I had the front of house sound engineer, record everything. And so I had these files just and I said, you know what? Let me go and listen to it. But it was kind of daunting to go 7 hours
Oh,
of.
dude, yeah.
And my initial thought with it was, okay, I'll just find the best bits from all this stuff and then chop it up and put together like kind of this record, and because other than because the inspiration is yes but also someone worked with very closely in that early period was Robert Fripp, and I'm a huge, maybe more than I'm actually more of a Robert Fripp devotee. You know what I mean? Like from a musical standpoint, and he's more inspired by Frippertronics, but I also love Robert Fripp as because he's a deeply spiritual person and committed to his ideals, musically and kind of politically. So I really, when you kind of have these people that you look up to that kind of that you can draw inspiration from when you're in art, when you're kind of in an artistic conundrum, you're like, okay, there's other people that have been down this path before me, and so for him, at that time when Frippertronics came about is after he left King Crimson, because it was like, oh, like this has gotten I'm not really feeling fulfilled. He went on a spiritual retreat, and then somewhere along he starts doing the Frippertronics thing, and he realized like, oh wow, like I can be a one-man band, and I don't have to have this whole thing, and kind of started rebuilding his career doing that, and then that eventually emerged into doing some solo work, and then the reformed King Crimson with Adrian Belew and Tony Levin and Bill Bruford. And so I was like, okay, this is like a good template. And so I thought I'll go through and I'll go and find these bits. And I realized like, oh, it's going to be really hard. I started, it took number one, like just a long time just to listen through everything, take notes, find, okay, that 3 minutes, that 4 minutes. And I realized like, it felt weird, but then it felt like experientially weird chopping it up. And so luckily, because maybe you've been streaming it, if you have the actual physical, you see like the two pieces that are on there were actually the first two performances from Sunday, the last day, the morning and the afternoon.
That makes sense,
so
because they were the same amount of time. And I was like, I actually thought, wow, man, he's made them the exact same amount of time. How artistically brilliant. That's what I was thinking.
Well, it's just from, by that point, you've been in it and doing it. And it was, really one of the most artistically draining things that I'd ever done in a long time. Wow. You would, because improvising for that long is really hard.
Oh yeah.
Is really difficult, and because I had a countdown clock up there and I'd close my eyes and, kind of get into it. I'd be like, oh my gosh, I must have been up here for 30 minutes. And then I'd look at the clock and it'd be like, holy shit, only 10 minutes has gone by. What am I going to do for another, I got to get here for another 30 minutes of this.
That's amazing.
But when you get there, you just have to believe that it starts going places that you're not in control of completely, especially when it's kind of new. And that's, like I said, I think as the artist, and this is kind of like my mantra this whole time, is when you as an artist are confronted with like the new things that are challenging, that's actually exciting. That's why it's exciting the first time you're in the garage with your friends, because you're like, can I even do this? And when you realize you can do it and get through the song, even if it's kind of tough, but you can actually get from it's like this exhilarating experience.
Totally.
You know what I mean? And so for me, it was that. It was I was so drained by the Sunday night. I was so tired because just the kind of mental energy it took me to do all that stuff. So I really loved those two performances. And for the most part, there wasn't anything like, because sometimes other ones you'd hear there'd be like, because, basically it's a drone, and a key.
Yeah.
And if you play one bad note, it's death. I mean, and sometimes I'd have the looper on and sometimes not. So sometimes it wasn't so if you play a bad note, it just kind of passes and it's fine, So those two performed were like, wow, really good. On the second one, there was one bad note, and thank God for, Melodyne now is polyphonic. I was with Josiah, who, we were able to go and go just to that section, and oh, there it is. You can see, because there's this huge. I mean, there might have been like 30 layers of loops, like kind of creating this dense, smeary, impressionistic kind of sound. And like there's one bad note that it wasn't. Luckily, like I said, the looper wasn't on at that point, and so we were able to just go in and boop, bump it up a half step, and you're like, oh my god, this is where technology is great. Yeah, like totally. How amazing that you could do that, because otherwise, because the problem with the piece is, because of the drones, because of the smeariness of the landscape, you couldn't do cuts and put them together.
Yeah.
It wouldn't work. It just didn't work that way. So you'd either have to do little snippets, which didn't really take you on the emotional journey.
Yeah.
Even for the vinyl, it was a bit of like honestly, the best way to experience this would be on CD probably, or the cassette. But even, because you could listen to the whole performance from beginning to end, 35 minutes, or so. But chopping it up for the two, for the record, because it's a double LP, is like, okay, you got to do about 18 minutes, and I decided on the cassette just to leave it like that, because I didn't want there's like one version of the song that's completely intact and one version. So I just it's always just going to be in these parts. And that's just like kind of the vinyl format being like the definitive way of kind of forming the piece. But so that's how it came to be. So it was part of this art installation. I took the material and found what I felt was really representative of it. But what I love about it, from where I'm at a very personal level, is, and why I call that metanoia, which is the term that I guess kind of can mean transformation. So it's kind of my transfer from this into something new, but it's also a transformation of kind of get, where on a spiritual standpoint, where you're stepping into, like, say, like the big ocean. Instead of like, I've been kind of wading in a stream, now I'm going to dip into the ocean and be kind of immersed in this whole kind of larger landscape of, thoughts, feelings, emotions, spirituality, whatever, however you want to define it. I'm not here to proselytize or anything like that.
Of course.
And so what I really liked about it from an artistic standpoint is that it's really ambiguous. And so if this is kind of the center of my artistic life, you can kind of, especially sonically, go in any direction.
Yeah.
And it kind of, because when I gave it to Chris at the label, and Chris, who put it out, he's a great human being, and he's been a fan of my music since Lassie Foundation.
Cool.
He's like, I still hear that voice in there, because it is me. It is me. Like, yeah. And I thought that was really, I found that to be really, like a wonderful thing to say, because that's what you want, is to develop your own voice in music. That's the key. That's the key to all this, is developing your own voice.
Yeah.
Your own. And so I like that it can go in many different ways, and I've been doing all different kinds of things, I'm really happy about it. And I know, and then trying to play it live, like well, how do I promote this and put a live show together by myself, has been totally fun too,
That's
and different. And it's funny, because I played 3 solo shows now.
I saw that. Yeah.
Yeah. And my friend, William Cashian, who plays bass in Future Islands. He was at the last 2, and he was like, he's like, wow, like he was at the second show and the third show, and after the show, she goes, that was completely different than the last time I saw, because I think it's hard, like what I accepted kind of post Pumpkins, and maybe it's confusing to some people, and I just don't really care. What I accepted for myself is that, how much do you want to reveal about your process? And so you can stay in your room, in your studio, and hide and go, I'm not going to present this to the world till it's totally finely tuned,
Yeah.
till like I got this completely worked out? Or are you going to go, hey, I'm going to play some shows and I'm going to be more of an open book and kind of give it people when and like, and so you can, if you care, you can see this evolution through time.
Yeah.
And I feel like, to me, that I feel comfortable being like that I don't feel like I may do 3 shows and go, I'm never going to do it again. You know what I mean? Or I may go, hey, I really like this. You know what I mean? I think that it's, it's that's kind of just what I've been doing.
I think it's cool because it kind of keeps it organic. I'm all about organic, man, both with food and life.
Nothing wrong with that, right?
Exactly. So, I know I've kept you a little bit longer than I'm supposed to. I'm going to try and wrap this up, but talk to me for a couple of minutes, if you wouldn't mind, about overall experience in recording studios and what you've kind of learnt as both a performer in a studio or a producer in a studio, because I see you do a bit of production work as well. Yeah. I guess if I want to summarize it, I would kind of maybe say, what sort of advice could you offer listeners who are maybe gearing up to go to a recording studio for the first time? I know that maybe that's a little bit redundant because most people don't even go to studios anymore, right? Which is kind of a tragedy because I find it such a great experience for a musician. But, anything you can maybe kind of condense into those sort of 3 topics: experience as a musician in a studio, experience as a producer in a studio, and some things that maybe people want to consider if they're going into studios.
Yeah, well, I think it's a great question. I think it's easiest to start from the top. So say you're going into one of these top studios, which I don't get to do that often anymore because people just, even in the Pumpkins, we never we didn't really go to, Billy has his own great studio and, everybody, we all have, if you're doing a guitar track, I could do it at home too. We have all these, you have great signal chain that's great, but there is nothing like, I think as you said, there's nothing that replicates like being in like one of these wonderful studios. I think what I would say, if you have the opportunity to go and work in this, be prepared. Don't go in going like, I'll figure it out when I get there. I mean, I would say if you're a band, be well rehearsed, know your song, have your parts worked out, what we used to call pre-production. I don't know if people even use, but it's funny, when I produce bands, I still like to do pre-production. So like I did a record with this great band out of LA called Living More, and we actually did the drums at East West, in the Pet Sounds room. So, and it was like so great to be able to record at that studio and be in that room and just the mics. I mean, but so knowing we were going to do that, we did like 2 or 3 weeks of pre-production where we went in, we had we didn't figure out anything in the moment as far as arrangements and stuff. Like the instrumentation, we overdubbed and tried all kinds of different things. But like as far as like this is going to be like kind of the structure of the song, like the basic dynamics of what the drums were going to do, I had to have that worked out because I don't want to be like when we're doing some other part of the record, like I don't like what the drums are doing. Like we just won't use it. And like we just spent all that money at this great studio, you know what I mean? So I wanted to have as good of an idea of what the dynamics of the songs were going to be like from going. So I feel like preparation is always really good. To me, even for me though, I have to say it's hard not to be intimidated when you're in those spaces because you think like, wow, everyone, and I've been able to record at Sunset Sound, the Village Recorder, East, all these great studios, and you're like, wow, Van Halen was in this room, or you name it, all these famous, and so you feel like it's easy to have like what people call imposter syndrome. Wow, I'm not that. I shouldn't. I don't know if I'm worthy to be here. I think it's hard, but once you can kind of get over that. And luckily with like the Pumpkins, it was cool. We had a few times where we did, like one time we did demos for like, I don't know, a couple weeks at the Village Recorder. And so you just kind of get and you get used to it, and you're like, wow, what a luxury to be able to just be in day, but that's so few and far between now where bands, I mean, I don't know anybody that really does it, like actually spends months in one studio.
Yeah, me neither.
I don't think even bands with the budgets don't really do it too much, very few, because, it's easier not easier, but you can record at home and be more comfortable, or have all your gear. Like I said, like that's to me is like the main reason why I like to work at home these days is I have like a guitar and pedal and amp collection and synths that I like to use when I'm working. The kind of like my toolbox, but it's too big of a toolbox to take anywhere unless you have cartage company. And that's just, like I said, it just doesn't happen anymore, where people are going to come and we're going to send someone over to grab all your stuff and take it to us. It's never going to happen. So you're stuck taking one guitar, two guitars, and it's not like the palette of sounds that I like to have at my disposal. So that's usually why I prefer to work in my own place now. But yeah.
And what about as a producer? I know that you mentioned the pre-production, but are there any things that you try and follow? Have you learnt anything in the studio in your years over the various studios you've been in that you now go in with a certain mindset when you're producing records?
For me as a producer, I mean, the idea of a producer has shifted and evolved over there. So when, for some people, a producer is someone who, I make beats, I run stuff through plugins, I'm not really going to change fundamentally maybe how you approach like what you're playing or something. I'm just going to take what you do and I'll sit here and manipulate it and spit it back to you. And that's one approach. And, that's not really how I work much. I mean, I don't, I think I'm more traditional, I guess, in that, for me, when I work with artists, I like to maybe just provide them with other viewpoints. Like, how can we, like, I'm actually working on a record, and I don't know. I mean, it's kind of, it's very in its early stages of, with Adam Miller, was from this band, the Chromatics. A lot of people know them. They were in the third season of Twin Peaks. They're actually the band playing in the Roadhouse.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, they're very, very cool looking, band. And, and so, and Adam and I have been playing some shows together, solo shows, because he kind of made like an instrumental guitar record too. And so I reached out to say, hey, let's play some shows together. And he's just a great human being. So him and I just really get along. I think our experiences in the music industry too, really create a bond for us, and how like we want to interact with each other. And so we've been having fun. And, so we started working, first we did this really cool cover of a Spaceman 3 song that we played at one of our live shows. And then I was like, you got any of your own tunes? And so he sent me some demos, and he had this one. It was like, it was cool. It was like a very early 90s kind of dream pop shoegazy kind of thing. And we started tracking it that way. And I did some scratch guitars. We kind of mocked it up. And I was like, like, this doesn't feel right. Like it just feels like, even though this sound is popular now, I feel like we're not 25 and this isn't like our first engagement with it. I feel like this is kind of too obvious for us to do. So, the song has been completely transformed in like something like a Kraftwerk meets Depeche Mode, synth pop, kind of mostly the whole basically infrastructure of this track is all synths, and really taking the song, even though it's in theory kind of the same chords, but you wouldn't even and it's the same. I mean, it's built over the same template, but and it's just, I've seen it through working with him. It's triggered like all these different ideas and melodies in Adam's mind. And to me, that's what I like to do is was like, and I think that's what I learned from like working with someone like Billy,
Yeah.
who worked with Flood, who worked with Eno, who, which is like, you come in with the campfire song, and this song actually exists in many iterations.
Yeah.
And you want to explore the space to find like what version of this song is the best. And sometimes it's, the reggae version, or maybe it's the reggae shoegaze version, or, you know what I mean? Like you're kind of pulling pieces from all these different ways the song could come out. And I think that's what I like to do, or I like to introduce like a sound or a texture or something that makes the artist do what they do, but they react to it in a way that pulls something slightly different, rather than going like, okay, you know what, go sit in the other room, let me chop up your stuff and run it through this and go like, hey, what do you think? Because ultimately that producer wants you to sound like what they want you to sound like, you're not really creating anything unique. You know what I mean? And so I'm not, so like, to me, I want the artist to be happy and go like, okay, I'm exploring new space, because otherwise they just do it themselves, right?
Exactly.
You know what I mean? They just do it themselves. So that's like, to me, like my approach.
That's awesome.
In the studio. Yeah.
Jeff, I have one last question for you, please. What do you think has either been the best piece of advice you've ever received in regards to having a music career, or if you can't think of something along those lines, what do you think is something you've learned along the way that might serve as good advice for an up-and-coming musician?
In light of all the all the various things that we've talked about over the course of this conversation, and I think some of them are actually very heavy conversations and could be very emotionally charged, and as we talked about, like, kind of the sensitivity of being an artist or a musician, and I think these types of people we're drawn to it. You know what I mean? And that's why you get a lot of, as seemingly different as we are, lots of musicians, on the outside, on the inside, we have this similarity of kind of like this kind of artistic sensitivity, which is, probably what brings us together. Through all my experience, and is, when you're introduced to truth, it's so simple usually and obvious and clear, but it may take you a lifetime to understand it, to understand that clarity. Usually truth isn't complicated, but we complicate it with our mind. And when I first joined the Smashing Pumpkins, someone who worked for the band, he worked for the band all through the early days, up to I joined the band, and then he actually left, as an employee, kind of around 2008, around the time right after I think, 2008. But he told me very simply, I got the gig, and I was at rehearsal in Chicago, which was just so overwhelming, that first rehearsal, and he just looked at me and he said, don't let the highs get too high and don't let the lows get too low.
That's awesome.
And it really is the truth, because if you attach yourself to the emotional roller coaster, which it is going to be, no matter how big you are, how successful, there's going to be moments where it dips down. There's going to be disappointments. There's going to be things when people wrong you, or you feel wrong, you wrong other people. You know what I mean? It's not just you, it's things that you may do. If you attach yourself, like your sense of identity of who you really are, to that, it is tough. So I and that's what I've learned is, even, I have difficult days now, going like, what am I doing? What am I going to do? Like, how am I going to, 5 years from now, 3, what am I going to do to survive? I'm going to have to think about these things. The music landscape is shifting so much. Man, maybe I could have been playing stadiums with Green Day, I could have been I wouldn't have to think. I'd still do the same thing year after year. I would have had security and all those things. What did I do? You know what I mean? I have moments like that for sure. For sure. And then I have moments where I talk to a former tour manager, and he was asking me, "Hey, so what have you been up to?" And I was just telling him all the things I've been doing. And one thing I didn't mention is, and I'll just mention it quickly, is one of the, like maybe the last 8 or 9 months, I've been very seriously studying classical guitar with a teacher out here, and it's really just because I wanted to have the opportunity to maybe pursue it at a more serious academic level, and also I wanted to get more into composition from the classical perspective, and I thought it would be a good way to learn about those kind of things on an instrument that I know very well. And so, but I've just fallen in love with it. So I was just telling about it. But the more important thing about it is when he said, what's so great about hearing you, and I can just tell legitimately you're so happy and excited about all the things that you're doing. And but it's a balance. So I am happy, but I have to, but the business side of it, the career aspirations it plays a part of it too. And that's always the balance as musicians, that we have to encounter. And so when someone tells you don't let the highs get too high and the lows get too low, I really understand what that means, because I've seen people, who play Madison Square Garden, walk off stage and are like, man, I just did it. I can't, I'm there. I did it, but I don't know. It doesn't really mean anything, other than I think it means something. Like it means something if it means something as a point of success. It's like I can see, like, if you start in a band in the in your basement or your garage, and then you make it to that point, it's a certain marker of success, and I think that is very valid. But you realize that doesn't ever really feed the artistic part of you that's going, like, you have to think, well, what's next?
Yeah.
What's next that's going to fulfill me on an artistic level, because the money that you're going to get from those kind of things, it's great. And that gives you freedom and peace of mind, hopefully, and health insurance that you can afford, and all these kind of things, which are extremely important things to have. But it's really not about the art anymore at that point.
Yeah.
That's just kind of a business recognition of your artistic success. So don't let the highs get too high, don't let the lows get too low, because I think vacillating between those extremes can be very detrimental.
I have to agree. Alrighty, Jeff Schroeder, dude, I can't thank you enough for being so gracious with your time. I thoroughly enjoyed that chat. And I know I said it earlier, but I love how transparent it came through about just how different variables can be, in life. It's like it's not one-dimensional as sometimes it's perceived, especially through a screen on a phone. It's so easy to look at it and go, oh, this person does that, and that's all they ever do. And I just thoroughly enjoyed that. I can't thank you enough, my man. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Anytime, man. Anytime. Peace. Sweet. There we have it. Jeff Schroeder, everybody. Make sure you check out Jeff at jeffkimschroeder.com. Check out his music. It's incredible. I want to thank Jeff publicly for his time. I felt that he was very transparent and honest during this interview, which is obviously appreciated. It was a nice interview to just remind us that we are so much more than just musicians, and that people have different layers and variables to them. So I can't thank him enough for that. As I say on each show, please don't forget to leave us a rating or review. My name is Travis Mark. You can find out more about me at musicians-mentor.com. If you need some help or advice or tips or guidance on your band or artistic career, please drop me a DM or an email. I'm always happy to help. Until next time, stay diligent, work hard, but have some fun. Peace.
Free audio post-production. by alphonic.com.